Thanks for joining us. I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Alberta Weekly. Voting has begun to determine the political fate of Alberta Premier Jason Kenney. Card-carrying United Conservative Party members have until May 11th to get in their votes to determine if Kenney will continue to lead the party. The results will be made known on May 18th. Kenney has faced open dissent from some party and caucus members for more than a year. He made it clear in a recent speech that this vote must end the feuding one way or another. Almost 60,000 party members will be voting on whether he should remain as leader of the United Conservative Party. If Kenney receives less than 50 plus 1% of the votes, a leadership race must be called. The mayor of Fort Macleod, Alberta, says its city councillor Marco Van Hugenbos's role in helping organize the Coutts border blockade was, quote, unacceptable. Mayor Brent Fader read Van Hugenbos a letter of reprimand at the March 28th council meeting. Fader says that while members of the public office need to be held to a higher level of conduct, he also encourages the public to think about the broader picture.
It's not about one individual here. It's about what was the message of the whole convoy, and we can't skip over that. A lot of people have been concerned with how things have been going, but it seems a lot of times people aren't being heard. And it's at some point people are like, what do we do? And we all have a responsibility to make our country better. It's not just one leader, it's just not a bunch of people here and there. It's how do we all keep each other accountable to a higher level of responsibility and accountability for our country.
In the letter, Fader wrote that any further instances by Hugenbos could result in sanctions, including removal from town committees. A man who was charged with conspiracy to commit murder during the Coutts border blockade protests has waived his right to a preliminary hearing. The lawyer for Christopher Lysak says his client has decided to go with a trial by jury. Lysak, along with 3 other men, were charged with uttering threats, mischief to property, and possession of a weapon after police found a stash of guns during the protest near Coutts. He and the other men charged will be back in Lethbridge Court on April the 25th. The government of Alberta says it will continue to invest in technology to help create more employment for Albertans. Jobs Minister Doug Schweitzer says his government is seeking to create 20,000 new jobs and see Alberta's technology companies generate $5 billion more in annual revenue by the year 2030. Schweitzer says, however, that skills training is vital to help fill those jobs.
We need all the range of skills from people that are going to be doing micro-credentialing all the way up to the most advanced people doing data science and high-end artificial intelligence training at schools like the University of Alberta, as well as quantum science technology at the University of Calgary. So we're launching initiatives like our micro-credential initiative that we did earlier this year with a pilot project, we did with a $5.6 million project with the University of Calgary. We also want to increase the enrollment. So you saw in our last budget an additional $600 million for skills, for training opportunities in Alberta. We need to increase the enrollment in programs like computer science, engineering, data science as well. So we're going to make sure we can increase that capacity because right now we have thousands of job opportunities in Alberta and we got so many people that want to fill those jobs. We have to increase the capacity at our post-secondary institutions.
Following Tuesday's announcement, Darren Bellows, NDP critic for economic development and innovation, says the UCP has caused historic damage to post-secondary institutions, including cutting 2,600 tech spaces that would provide the workforce needed to grow our tech sector. A special honor has been bestowed on a couple of grain elevators in the town of Nanton, Alberta. The 95 and 93-year-old landmarks were officially granted designation as a provincial historic resource. The designation, which is a form of legal protection, means the elevators will be eligible for more funding and grant opportunities from both the federal government and the province. Officials say the historic stamp will allow necessary repairs to take place and will help to further develop the site as a tourist attraction. Coming up after the break, as the situation in Ukraine becomes more dire, a concerned group in Medicine Hat is doing all they can to help. Plus, we hear from a Ukrainian immigrant in southern Alberta who shares a first-hand account of what his family and friends are experiencing back in Ukraine.
The house was burned down. Her business was burned down. She's a good friend of mine. She's a godfather to one of my kids. So she asked for help. I said, well, we can buy you a ticket. We can provide you with the paperwork. We can bring you to our place. We have a guest bedroom. You're fine. Then she said, there is another family with me that needs to be helped too.
Welcome back. A group from Medicine Hat, also known as Hatters, have felt compelled to assist their Ukrainian friends and families stuck in dire situations back in their hometowns. They're particularly concerned to hear that much of the financial aid being sent to Ukraine isn't going to help the civilians who are starving and freezing. It's instead going straight to the military for weapons. Today, we hear from Chris Christie and George Kovalev, who have founded Hatters Help Ukraine. Let's maybe talk about what your group is doing and how this all came about.
So there's a few of us that, well, many people in Medicine Hat, like everywhere else, that are just horrified as to what's happening in the Ukraine and wondering how we can help that would really make a difference. And we're hearing about, evacuees trying to come to Canada. And we thought Medicine Hat's an awesome city. We are known for volunteerism and wrapping our arms around causes. So I made a few just inquiries. Is anything happening? And at this point, nothing had been, but was connected with Ukrainian immigrant, George. And so he and I met, and so we've talked to a few people, and now it is absolutely snowballing. So we're trying to be an organization that partners with community charity groups and faith-based organizations to help bring Ukrainian families to Medicine Hat.
So did this just start because you were just horrified about what you were seeing in the news, or do you have any personal?
Yeah, many people are. It's not just me. Many people are.
Absolutely.
And they want to help. They just don't have a vehicle to do it. So we're creating the vehicle to do it.
Oh, that's great. Do you have any personal connections to Ukraine, or was your motivation maybe just basically that?
No, I don't. But I've worked in the not-for-profit sector my entire career, and I'm retired now. And it just seemed like I just had to do something, and the response from Medicine Hat so far, even though we're in our preliminary stages, has been phenomenal, just phenomenal. We've already had offers of employment for the evacuees. We've had furniture donated. We've had an apartment unit ready to go for the first family that comes. Like it's just really starting to take off. I also want to say that our local community foundation, the Community Foundation of Southeastern Alberta, is our charitable connection in terms of if people want to donate, make donations there, they'll get a charitable tax receipt. And then we're also partnering with McMahon Community Services because they've really got some boots on the ground and are helping us with the disbursement of the donations.
While Chris Christie takes care of donations and social media, her Hatters Help Ukraine partner, George Kovalev, connects with family and friends still living in Ukraine, keeping tabs on their needs and coordinating relief efforts.
So it's pretty much started like one-man army. I was myself called about her terrible situation when she lost all her possessions, like the house was burned down, her business was burned down. She's a good friend of mine. She's a godfather to one of my kids. So she asked for help. I said, well, we can buy you a ticket. We can provide you with the paperwork. We can bring you to our place. We have a guest bedroom. You're fine. Then she said, there is another family with me that needs to be helped too. I said, well, we can squeeze two. Then another person came back to me, and the other person, and the other person. It trickled down to about a dozen families in my possession in different stages of immigration. So I had to learn how to do the paperwork for immigration. I have to do the whole process for them. So two people already have their visas. Two families, sorry. I don't say it right. I'm talking about families. In the family matter, like 12 families are in different stages. 2 of them already done, 10 more are coming. Ideally, the way I envision that is with the community support, with proper fundraising, with the volunteering support. we're trying to achieve them a safe transfer to Canada and good settlement services. My partner, Chris, who knows who's guru in that thing, she brings up to speed the different organizations that she has connections with. I'm doing my part. Well, say for the last 2 weeks, I haven't slept too much because I have
Yeah.
calls 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, especially today, like 5 o'clock in the morning. I was awakened by the call, and I already dealt with like 20 people since this morning trying to arrange things.
After the break, we hear more from George Kovalev, who recounts some shocking firsthand experiences from his family members stuck in the Donbas region of Ukraine.
I have some really heartbreaking stories about people who died of starvation. And it's 21st century in Europe. I have stories of people died of freezing to death. Because when the war started, like, well, see, there was no heating. It started with the power, like, well, those high voltage lines went down, and then the whole city lost the power. Losing the power, they lost the pump that pump out the water in the city system, so no water with it. Then
Welcome back. As the war in Ukraine rages on, we bring you some accounts of the struggles the civilians there are facing. In addition to being in the middle of a war zone, they're also facing no access to food, water, or heat. Here once again is my interview with George Kovalev, a Ukrainian immigrant in Medicine Hat, Alberta, who fears for his family back in his homeland. We've been hearing reports too that they have no access to food or water. Is that true?
that's true. I would tell you even more. My friend has to learn, like she said, how to properly loot the store. There is no food. The cops opening the door in a store, and a swarm of people, the mob runs inside. So you're like, well, it's not just we know how to loot. We should know how to loot properly. Because some people take perishable items, they run towards some preserves that last for a while and stuff. Well, now the situation get a little better because the Russian troops who arrived down there start delivering them humanitarian packages. But if you can picture 2,000 people standing in a line to receive those rations. Yeah. I have some really heartbreaking stories about people who died of starvation. And it's 21st century in Europe. I have stories of people died of freezing to death. Because when the war started, like, well, see, there was no heating. It started with the power, like, well, those high voltage lines went down, and then the whole city lost the power. Losing the power, they lost the pump that pump out the water in a city system, so no water with it. Then in 2 or 3 days, gas supply stopped as well. In a few days, heating stopped as well. And the phone services, like, well, at first, like, people who couldn't charge their phones, the phones died. And then the base stations that provide cellular network, they lasted a little longer on the batteries, but then they died too. So they end up with nothing. Stores, like, cards are not accepted. Like, even for cash, you can literally buy anything. They rely on humanitarian aid. And at the time when I was expecting the Canadian government would step in and provide them with food, shelter, tents, blankets, whatever, we send the guns and we send the money to equip the troops. For me, it was like I was really frustrated with that. So that's why I started my little battle.
Okay. So you're saying that we're talking about the $11 million, I guess, that has been given. Well, that's from Alberta government.
Well, out of the $11 million, $5 million went straight to Ukrainian army, not to the humanitarian relief.
What's behind the armbands? I've been hearing that there's different colored armbands to represent whose side you are on. Is there any
Well,
truth
if
to
you
that?
look at if you look at some Ukrainian media, most of the time you see Ukrainian military wearing the blue bands. It's one of the colors of our national flag, blue and yellow. So most of them, they put the blue bands to recognize themselves during the battle because it's hard to recognize. Everybody's wearing military fatigues. You don't know who's who. So for them, it's a symbol that recognizes their own. Some Russians, I would say all of them, were the white bands. And then when this tragedy in Bucha happened, the conflicting stories are telling that some of the civilians who live in that city put the white bands to be recognizable by Russians, so they're not an enemy. And when Ukrainian militia battalions, those poorly trained people, came in there, they started shooting in this. Well, that's what those reports are saying. I witnessed that. I can't say for somebody else. They start shooting the white bands because they consider them traitors. They consider them collaborating with Russians. So for them, it was a big deal.
Lastly, how can people connect and help your group, Hatters for Ukraine?
The best way would be if Instagram and probably Facebook in the future, or email address. So that's a way we could be addressed to.
Okay.
So Chris is taking care of that. I'm still working on my little project with bringing Ukrainians over and how to safely deliver them here and provide them with the proper paperwork so it works out for us.
George, it looks like we are out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing all this information.
No problem. Thank you very much.
We need to take a quick break, but when we return, our legislative reporter discusses the Prime Minister's visit to the West and Pierre Poilievre's rallies in southern Alberta.
He basically said that the government is not following the science, that the provincial government is not following the science. And the provincial government, the UCP, has been somewhat hostile to supervised consumption sites. The project in Lethbridge, for example, has been very controversial. There's been issues around the Sheldon Tumor Center in Calgary.
Welcome back. Well, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited Edmonton this past week and criticized Alberta's handling of the opioid crisis, as well as the province's current addiction recovery strategy. Here is legislative reporter Tyler Dawson to break it down with BCN's Hal Roberts.
Now, with our Prime Minister in Edmonton recently, he also criticized Alberta with regards to our province's response to the opioid crisis. What issues did Trudeau have?
He basically said that the government is not following the science, that the provincial government is not following the science. And the provincial government, the UCP, has been somewhat hostile to supervised consumption sites. The project in Lethbridge, for example, has been very controversial. There's been issues around the Sheldon Tumor Center in Calgary. And what they've done is that they've poured a lot of money into recovery-oriented opioid things, you know, getting people into therapy and rehab and those sorts of things. And they've put up some roadblocks, let's say, that might be overstating it a bit, to accessing supervised consumption sites. For example, you need an ID and a health card now or you will. I'm not 100% sure if that's come into effect, but that's been really controversial. That if you're going to go use drugs, you'd need this documentation. That actually was fought through the courts, and the folks that went to court lost, and the government won that. But anyways, the Prime Minister is basically saying that they're not following the science by opting for this recovery-oriented approach instead of a harm reduction approach. And this was criticized quite strongly by a press secretary for Mike Ellis, the addictions minister, saying that Trudeau's comments were a joke and shameful, and pointing to the money the government's put into recovery. So you can see very different philosophical approaches to the issue there. But it's been a parallel crisis to the COVID-19 pandemic that has maybe got not as much attention as it deserves. The numbers came out not that long ago, and something like 1,700 Albertans died last year from drug overdoses, and about 1,600 of them, about 91%, were related to opioid poisoning. So, very, very much a live issue, and very different political approaches, shall we say, to tackling the crisis.
Tyler, Conservative Party of Canada leadership candidate Pierre Poilievre is visiting Alberta right now to some very large and rambunctious crowds here. Now, more than 5,000 attended a recent rally at Spruce Meadows in Calgary. Many people may not realize this, but Poilievre is originally from Calgary. Yeah,
so he's not just an Ottawa area MP, he's sort of jetting off to Alberta to try and win support. I've said a number of times over the years that no matter what the path is to becoming prime minister, at least part of that road is through Alberta. You know, this is very much the Conservative heartland, and it's very important, I think, that leadership candidates spend time out here because, you know, almost every seat in the province goes to the federal Conservatives. Same with Saskatchewan. You saw that with Aaron O'Toole. He launched his leadership campaign in Calgary and was in Leduc, I think, a day or two later to sort of boost his campaign. So very important. And, you know, Poilievre, a very, very clear front runner, getting a huge support, substantial support all over the country and in Alberta in particular. And it's probably notable that, you know, what waves has Patrick Brown and Jean Charest made out here? Not very many, I think, is the answer to that.
No, exactly. And Poilievre talked about the fact that he grew up in Shaughnessy. You know, he graduated from UFC, so he has strong Alberta roots, definitely. Tyler, the Rural Municipalities Association of Alberta has officially come out against the UCP proposal of ditching the RCMP in favor of a provincial police force. What was the reasoning?
Well, they basically said they haven't seen the evidence that this is going to lead to better policing and is going to save money. Those are sort of the two issues that the rural municipalities are concerned about. This proposal goes back a long, long ways. You know, you can find this in the firewall letter to Ralph Klein in 2001 or 2002. This was part of the Fair Deal Panel's report from 2-ish years ago. So the government is, you know, they're approaching this as a way for some more independence from Ottawa, but they've also looked to the rural crime wave and concerns that have been raised in rural municipalities about the perception that there's been a lackluster RCMP response. And they're saying, look, well, why don't we have a provincial police force that's more responsive to local concerns, that has people, you know, with more attachment to the community, those sorts of things. And the government has also said it's going to save money, which is at minimum a debatable claim, because the federal government under the RCMP arrangement foots part of the bill. If we had a provincial police force, that wouldn't be the case. So it really comes down to money and the evidence of whether or not the policing would be any better. And Jason Kenney has sort of said there's going to be more consultation, but you know, he's sort of still sticking by the argument that this is maybe a good thing for the province.
Well, that's it for this week's edition of Alberta Weekly. Please check us out online at Bridge City News on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'm Jeanette Roche. Please come back and join us again next week. Have a wonderful long weekend and a lovely Easter holiday. See you next time.